Morning, HBC. Hope that you're doing well this morning. Well, yesterday in the Ramblings, we looked at the Trinity in theory, and today we see it in practice as Andrew Wilson, in his book Incomparable, leads us through the idea that one of the characteristics, the titles of God, is that he raised Jesus from the dead. He's referred to that way, the Lord who raised Jesus from the dead, which we might think of it as a funny thing to want to talk about, particularly in our modern or even postmodern world. The rational individual is supposed to be appalled or shocked or certainly discomforted by the realization that there are a group of people who believed a man who was dead on a Friday was not dead on a Sunday. I'm talking, of course, about the resurrection, something which the clergy in the higher echelons of the Church of England in the 70s and 80s were very keen to try and downplay, or at least explain away. But strikingly, something which Christians in the New Testament thought was rightly, I think, at the forefront of their faith, the cornerstone of their faith, and something which they wanted to talk about specifically with people who weren't Christians the whole time. Wilson then, in his book, goes on to give a brilliant defense of the resurrection. And he starts by saying that the empty tomb is as secure a fact as you're likely to find. He says it's interesting that none of the early opponents of Christianity disputed the empty tomb. They did dispute why the tomb was empty, but no one tried to say, oh, actually, the tomb wasn't empty. Why was that? Well, presumably because they knew that everyone knew that the tomb was empty, and therefore trying to deny it would be completely fruitless. The question which each of us has to ask for ourselves is, why was the tomb empty? I'm satisfied with the answer that it's because God the Father raised God the Son from the dead by the power of God the Spirit. But that's a question that each of us must decide for ourselves. Where does the evidence point? I think the evidence is very strong for Jesus' resurrection. But you need to make up your own mind. Two things that flow from the resurrection that are profoundly good news. And there's lots of other things as well, but here's just two. The first is this: the resurrection proves that Jesus has won. You'll remember on the cross, he cries out, "It is finished." Not "I'm finished," "it is finished." Crying out that his work on the cross, his sin-bearing work, his exhausting of the wrath of God against the sin of humanity was finished, so that everyone who believes in Jesus now may know that condemnation is not coming to them because it's fallen on Jesus. And in the resurrection, we get, if you like, the evidence that what Jesus cried out on the cross is true. I suppose had he died and not risen from the dead, we'd be left wondering, was his death really enough? In the resurrection, we see the answer to that question is yes, it is. And that you and I can live without fear of punishment, confident of our righteousness because of what Jesus has done, and the resurrection proves it. The second thing that the resurrection assures us is that the best is yet to come. Now, this is particularly good news for me. I've gone slightly creaking downstairs with a sore hip, and generally am feeling a bit exhausted. I didn't want to get up this morning. Well, the resurrection says their best is yet to come. There will be a real physical world in which I will really and physically move and have my being. I will enjoy physically the new creation, and the resurrection guarantees it. Jesus' resurrection, if you like, kicked off the whole general resurrection game. He is the first fruits, he is the first of many to come, so that all who believe in him might know the best is yet to come. So if, like me, you're slightly stumbling into the day, aching, feeling sore, and generally a bit bleh, Well, be encouraged. The best is yet to come, and Jesus' resurrection guarantees it. I hope that's an encouragement to you today. It certainly is for me. Have a really good day, HPC.